Welcome to episode 35 Out of Bounds on the Boom and Bust channel, a podcast where I give my social commentary on different topics in today's society. I'm your host, Terry. It's been a little bit, but I definitely want to get on and talk about today's topic, which is politics and governance and how that goes into our education. I said this before, and I'll reiterate again. There was once a time where American education was designed to create productive members of democracy, Back when we were early in our country's origin, in the ideas of democracy and ideals, what the purpose of education was to make sure that when people were of age to go vote, that they were actually educated enough to be able to make an informed decision, basically. And that democracy depends on the people being educated enough about the issues, the topics, and what's important, at least enough to make, again, an informed decision for themselves. Not to say that we teach you to go this way or that, but it teaches you to understand how to make your own decision. And through a lot of different reasons, we gotten away from that. And so then we fast forward to 2020, where we understand, I think most of us, that a lot of people are either miseducated or uneducated on the political system. I include myself in that too. Obviously being a product of American education, where if you aren't in direct contact with somebody that's in politics or in governance, then there's very little chance that you will understand the inner workings of it, especially at a young age, because that used to be the job of the educational system. And so governance is really important. I mean, I think hopefully we all understand that, not just from the big tip of the top, which is the president, but also down to any small thing that we do in America. I mean, democracy is kind of what we're founded on. And these ideas that if we get a certain number of people in the room that are all invested in the same issue, and we want to go to decide how to go about that issue, what do we say? Put it to a vote. So voting, like this idea of being able to have your voice heard through governance, who has a seat at the table. And then in relation to that, when you have a table where decisions are being made, understanding the power that comes with that position and what then comes after that when people have power. We're talking about corruption. We're talking about, influence. We're talking about all these different things, this responsibility to serve the people. So there's a lot that goes into it. But on the average, do we understand it as citizens? And the argument that I would make is no. I would think it's very clear by a lot of things that happens, but through my own interactions, again, being an educator in the higher education system, in the K through 12 system, being in large inner city areas, going to impoverished neighborhoods, not even that, I would honestly say just in your gentrified neighborhoods, suburban neighborhoods, talking to the average child, teenager, what do they actually know? I mean, they force us to do the Constitution, go through this U.S. history, and we pass it, and it's very symptomatic of the rest of our education. It's just pump and dump. You know it now, and then you pass tests, and then you go on about your business. But how many people actually know how the electoral college work? How many people understand what a House of Representatives or what the House of Representatives do? How many people understand what a congressperson does? How many people understand? I mean, shoot, we had the whole impeachment with Trump, and you saw how many people didn't even understand what impeachment were. And again, that's at the very top. So then how could we ever understand or expect people to understand the trickle down, which is voting for your local alderman, voting for, the Chamber of Commerce, voting for comptrollers, voting for judges. And if so, those things are really impactful. Obviously, who sits as the president is impactful, but a lot of things are just, if not more impactful to your everyday life, because you can see now with certain administrations, there's going to be a lot more state power to do things in their certain way. And the federal government isn't always going to rule with a strict hand. So your local governments matter. They absolutely matter. And one thing that I was saying early in the pandemic is that I was really hoping that this opened up people's eyes, not to who we have in charge right now, but what they can do. And that goes from the presidency and that goes all the way down because, again, largely the order has been state by state. You take care of your pandemic measures. And so now we start to see what real effect people have, whether it's a mayor, whether it's a governor. And even if you're young or even if you're just miseducated on it, hopefully you start to see what they really can do. And so through this, I was just hopeful that would be one takeaway. But this goes back to this conversation that if we understood that as an average citizen you go up to on a random street, if we felt good as a country knowing that on average you walk up to somebody and they would understand the structures and mechanisms, then we could be a lot more confident in what we go to do. But the rhetoric the narrative is that politics is corrupt. And again, as I said, when you have a seat or when you have a table where decisions are being made and there's only a certain amount of seats, that in itself creates power. And with power comes temptation, corruption, all that. However, the biggest source of power, and you can look at this in all type of social justice lenses. You could look at this in our political lens. You could look at this in any way you want. One of the biggest sources of power that people do not understand is the power of ignorance. The power of ignorance goes much further than anything else that you can have, because you have the ability to operate anonymously, silently, without people having to understand it and rally against it. Because there's some disruption that can happen when you get thousands of people to march. Disruptions that can happen when thousands of people riot and loot. Disruptions that can happen when you have thousands of people come for a speech. But imagine if you had a collective movement of almost millions of people that all agree this is what we want. It would get done. It does not matter. It would get done. And the only reason that you're able to break that apart is through ignorance, whether that's ignorance of misinformation, where you're dividing and polarizing people between party lines and different issues, or whether people just don't know. I always said this in our last election, and I think a lot of studies have came out and at least hinted at it, is that the reason you had the turnout you did is because a lot of people that might not feel like their voice was being heard, or a lot of people that don't really know how to dig in past the surface level of these arguments, and that could be on both sides, they came out to vote because somebody said something to them that resonated, and they came out to vote because they believe what was said, but they didn't dig any further. And a lot of these people, I would venture to guess, did vote for the presidency, but didn't vote for the local mayor. They didn't vote for any of their local politicians. They didn't, really look at the judges, the clerks, they didn't really look at who was doing things within their local level. And a lot of people do. They don't go down the ballot. And again, I count myself as one of these people. I'm not a big, political student. I'm not a poli-sci student. This is not something I'm diving into, but this is something that I've noticed and connected the dots over my time with working. And so for me, I think just looking at what we see, a lot of times people are able to get away with stuff because they pass these long bills or they go through these processes that are complicated and people don't understand, or they put language into different things and people just don't understand the importance of it. And so they're able to get away with these things. They're able to get away with the mismanagement of campaign money. They're able to do these corrupt things because no one's holding them accountable. And that's the job of the people. I always say, point out Paul Mooney, Godfather of comedy. One of my favorite jokes that really just resonates with me, not that I'm advocating violence, but he said, he makes a joke that we need to have a revolution every, couple years like they used to. They march down to the White House, start chopping off heads. And again, I advocate we do that, but that power was there. And as people, whether you're Secret Service, Army, whatever, that was allowed for the people to express because they knew that you had to hold these people accountable because you work for us. And so instead of worrying about campaign donors and who's going to give me money, the people that you're supposed to be serving could come down, drag you out of that office if you really aren't doing what you're supposed to do. And again, that collective power has been dispersed over these many decades, to the point where we are now, where people don't even know what politicians are doing. They don't even really know what those positions are. There's a lot that I don't know what they are. And they have real impact. They have material impact on your everyday life. But we as a society, collectively, we don't value that information. And so how this hits me, as I mentioned earlier, this governance is not just our political system. It's governance on all types of levels. The power to make decisions is real power. And obviously those who allocate money, that's real power as well. I think if you ask most people, they wouldn't even be able to articulate really what politics is. And really at its core, what a lot of people, or a lot of material and scholarly writing would say, is that politics is the negotiation or bargaining of power and resources. And resources tends to be money, but it can be land. It could be all, we all know the different types of things that politicians like, whether it's favors, all that. But those are resources. And so when we're talking about who's conservative, who's liberal, we're talking about where this money should go. A lot of times we're talking about where money should go. Should money go to big businesses to bail them out rather than money going back through reparations, or money going to lower class people, or who should pay taxes, or should the government pay for this? And a lot of times it's money, but it's other things. It's other things that are just resources. And so that really is what it is. So when you're talking about again, any type of thing, it can be politics, not just our big government. So, for example, one thing that came across to me, and I'm gonna keep it anonymous. Obviously, if people know me, they know what I'm talking about. But there was an incident at my alma mater that really opened my eyes up to it, where there was basically this situation that brought upon this movement for a lot of students, a lot of black students, to talk about their experiences at the institution. And while not really a part of what happened, obviously I'm not a current student, but it did prompt me to have some conversations with other alumni that I know from my era and before, and younger as well. And one thing I found out is that a big issue at the school is that a lot of our black supported organization groups and everything rarely got the type of money that other organizations got. And so Whether that's student organizations, whether that's Greek organizations, whether that's events that were trying to be thrown, whether that was homecoming committees, all these different things, it was unequal in how the money was being dispersed. So I thought, okay, that's interesting. Again, in my undergrad, I was active, but not active in orgs in that way where I did events and stuff. I was just one of the people that showed up. So I didn't really know how that stuff went. But, whether it was organizations being charged to use a room that other organizations didn't get charged for, all these different things. So I'm just like, okay, what's the issue? Why is that? Because in my mind, somebody was in charge of student organizations and a professional, decided how the budgets rolled out, and I thought it was even. But what I found out is that a big part of the money being distributed is the student government. And so the student government was a lot of times involved in who got what from the student organization budget, who got what from, this budget and all these different things. And as it turns out, a lot of people that were in student government or in offices were largely white male fraternity guys. And that makes sense to me. But it all kind of clicked in that moment because I rewind myself back to senior year of college. When I first realized we even had a student government president, I didn't even know what that was. I'm thinking student council and all that stuff. We left that in high school. Like, we're here to do other things. It never even occurred to me that you could hold an office, like that the government or that the students even had an office in a position that you could hold in a government. And even once I found out about it, I'm like, okay, what is that, like homecoming king and queen? Like, what does that really mean? Like, you're the student body president? Because in the schools that I grew up in, student council didn't do anything. And so they never got nothing done. And they never really did anything but meet and just kind of say you were in it. So in my mind, I'm like, what could that group even do? And as I graduated, never even really knew. But now I'm hearing this, and then I start learning other things as a professional, and you see behind the scenes, at least at my alma mater, like how students can actually real life impact what happens at this organization. Now, that's not every school. Not every school is going to give as much power in the students. But at least here we did have that, a certain amount of power. Not even that, but we also had a student position for our board of trustees. As a college student, I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I didn't know about it until now, but even if I knew about it as a college undergrad, I wouldn't have even cared. But then to be on this side and to learn what that actually means, to have a voice, to have a seat at the table, to be in charge of allocating resources. It's not a coincidence that the money flowed to certain type of people when you had certain type of people, always the same certain type of people in power in the student government. And then that goes for the board of trustees, that goes for the administration, that goes for all that. Those are the people who bring their bias, who bring their prejudice, who bring their thoughts and opinions. They all bring it to these seats of power. And that's where change happens. But guess what? One thing I said while talking to these students, while talking to these alumni, we all talked about, okay, now I'm like, okay, they didn't give us a fair shake. But I'm like, who do we know that tried to be in the presidency? Who do we know that tried to be on the student government cabinet or whatever it's called? Like, who do we know that ran for that? Because I guarantee you, like I said, me and everybody I know, we didn't even know about it. That's including Latino, white, all types of people in my group. We didn't even know about it, let alone did any of us run for it. And so you had the same type of people, and that's changed now. In the recent years, we have a very different election with our student government, but up until then, it's been the same people for the longest time, and the reason it has been because that information was passed down. That was passed down from their other fraternity, from their organizations, from their brothers, for them telling them, hey, you should value this. Hey, make sure that you have somebody at least in this position in student government because it's going to get you this. Hey, make sure you have somebody in this position for this because it's going to help you with this. They understood that information, but also they valued it. And so that's not to say that nobody knew about these positions, but obviously we didn't value it as a community enough for us to make sure that we were represented. We are worried about Black Student Union. We're worried about being Greek. We are worried about being athletes. We are worried about being on the dance team, but we weren't worried about putting ourselves in these seats of power. And that's not an indictment on us. It's part of our issue, but it's also because we weren't educated. Most of us aren't. And I say us, I mean us as U.S. citizens. We're not educated on the power that government really has. And so when you look at it from a specific example like that, then you can really extrapolate it out to a much bigger concept where this continues to happen. And it's not just politics. I mean, obviously, we have a teacher shortage. There's a teacher shortage in the U.S. There's a nurse shortage. There is, especially when we're talking about teachers of color, male teachers in general, and male teachers in color even more. Those are shortages out there. We have shortages in a lot of different areas where people don't see the value in doing it. And we have a shortage in people of color being politicians. And so, again, when we want to be representative, and it's not that we're all a monolith, it's not that everybody thinks the same, but when you want some type of representation, it's hard when the pool isn't large. I've had this argument where we're talking about NFL head coaches. Again, when we're talking about teachers and professors, where everybody's right now demanding to have professors of color, teachers of color. And it's not to say there's none, but the pool is very small. I don't know that people are intentionally just not picking people. But what I do know is that the number of candidates is going to be vastly outweighed by the number of candidates in the majority, because the number of students even going into it is outweighed. I mean, I could look at that in so many different ways. Where anything you're talking about, you got to look at the actual pool. People just look at the results. Oh, we only have this many women, but how many women are going into that major to even pick from that career? And so a lot of times we just want to switch the results right now without thinking about how to change the pool. And a lot of times it comes with putting money into it, and a lot of people don't always want to do that or put their time into it. And a lot of people don't want to do that because guess what? When they needed coders, when they started needing engineers, guess what they do? They started investing money into school programs for the youth, not for seniors, for the youth. They want you in STEM camps, young. They want you coding. They want National Day of Coding. They got marketing. They got all these things. We'll pay for some classes. Like, they want to get you engaged so they can increase the pool. And that's what we have to do with a lot of these things, especially politics. But the biggest thing that I'm here to say and to advocate for is that we need, as a not even as a society, as a country, from the federal level, just like with the Constitution and all that, we need to mandate that we have politics and governance being taught for everybody. I don't care if you're a charter school. I don't care if you are a public school. I don't care if you're a high school, kindergarten, whatever. We need to find places and curriculum that we can mandate. And we got to get back to creating good citizens of democracy, because we used to hold people accountable in this country. And what happened is that politicians start to see more power in keeping people ignorant. And that's not what it should be. I don't care who they are. I don't care, I'll just say Obama, because probably one of the most charismatic ones that had a lot of love. But I don't care if it's Trump that a lot of people love. I don't care who it is you love. They need to be held accountable. And they will seize power when you give it to them. And I say that we need to make sure that we're educating our citizens so that that's not possible. We need to make sure that every student leaving high school understands what that local election means for them, that they understand how to find people's platforms and policies, that we understand the value of it. I mean, right now we are, as a world, not even America, we are obsessed with jobs. We're obsessed with jobs and salaries and making money, and I get it. That's how we live. But at the same time, I would argue that us being good citizens of democracy is even more important. Like, I don't need you to leave school with an associate's degree or with a welding certificate, more so than I need you to leave high school with the ability to understand how to exercise your vote. And yes, I do think in the process we'll get more politicians, but that's not really the game. The game is that we're having most people come out and vote. If every single person that could vote voted and the results are what they are, then they are what they are. But we want everybody's voice represented. And then on top of that, I want people to understand what they should be holding people accountable for. And it's hard to do that if you don't even know what they do, if you don't understand the process. And then again, stuff happens with elections, especially where people are like, well, that's not right, that's not fair. But we don't have enough movement because enough people don't even know that something wrong happened, because they don't even know how it's supposed to look. And so, again, I think, at least for me, one of the answers is reinvesting. And again, that's where politics comes down to: resources, reinvesting the resources to make this a national thing, that we are educating our students to become good members of democracy, that they will go out and vote, that they will understand people's platforms, that they will challenge people to articulate exactly how they're going to get these things done, and that they're having themselves represented wherever possible, whether that's on the federal level, the state level, or the local level. And so for me, not only just, again, these big elections, but in life, I think we could start to understand a little more the importance of governance. And so that people don't have to be dragged into doing a school government. College students don't have to be dragged into doing a student government or residence hall government or any of these type of positions, or at least trying to be on the executive board of something. Like, they want to gain these experiences, and they want to be able to, if not be the person in the seat, they want to at least know how they can support and keep people accountable who are in the seat. And so that we don't have as much corruption running around as we do. And I think that all starts and ends with the people. If us as a collective people decided to do something about anything, then it would get done. And I think it starts with us being educated. So that's it for me. Go down the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share it around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for going out of bounds.